Bien, a continuación nos va a hacer su presentación Tom Hamilton. Él es actualmente el director de Educación y Aprendizaje Profesional en el Consejo General de Enseñanza de Escocia. La trayectoria profesional de Tom ha cubierto prácticamente todos los ámbitos educativos. Se formó como maestro y como profesor de secundaria. Posteriormente ha estado dando clase en secundaria y ha sido jefe del departamento de inglés en este nivel. Después ha estado 15 años trabajando en formación inicial del profesorado en la Universidad del Oeste de Escocia, primero como profesor de estudios de lengua y después como catedrático y director de la licenciatura de Educación y finalmente como decano asociado de dicha universidad. Actualmente está en el Consejo General de Enseñanza de Escocia desde hace 9 años y primero ha estado a cargo de los estándares profesionales en Escocia para maestros y actualmente es, como he comentado, el director de Educación y Aprendizaje Profesional de dicho consejo. Tom nos va a comentar y nos va a explicar sobre el papel que tiene el Consejo General de Enseñanza, que actualmente es el que regula la profesión de docente en Escocia. Así que muchísimas gracias, Tom, y adelante.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation to come along to this session today. Very, very flattered to be here, to be asked to be here. It's a great pleasure to see you, and I wish the work that you're doing here very, very well. You'll see that I've entitled the presentation A View from Scotland, but I was actually asked to talk about the United Kingdom. And you will realise, I am sure, from the press, that the very issue of the United Kingdom at the minute in Scotland is a hugely political issue. It's a hugely political matter, the relationship between the Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom. So what I'm going to do is tell you a wee bit about the background where we currently are and briefly compare what's going on in Scotland with what's going on in England. And then I will tell you in rather more detail what we're doing in Scotland about leadership. And I thought the title of your conference, that notion of leadership and autonomy, summed up such a fundamental question about what everybody is trying to do with leadership these days, to get that balance right between leadership and autonomy. So, a little bit of history to begin with. The United Kingdom has been in place since 1707. And while for all these hundreds of years Scottish law was made in London, when the United Kingdom was formed, Scotland was promised 3 things. It could continue to have its own education system, it can continue to have its own legal system, it can continue to have its own religious system. And we do. We have separate Scots law, we have a Church of Scotland, and we have an education system that is markedly different from the rest of the UK, and always has been since 1707. At the very end of the last century, we had devolution, and we had the reopening of a Scottish Parliament for the first time in almost 300 years. And one of the prime responsibilities of that Scottish Parliament is to think about education in Scotland. And the Parliament in Edinburgh at Holyrood has thought very, very carefully about education. It's taken education very seriously over those years since devolution occurred. The situation in the UK at the present is that in the whole of the UK we have a Conservative, Liberal coalition. And I'll say a wee bit more about what that means for education in just a minute, whereas in Scotland what we have is a government formed by a party called the Scottish National Party. Now its name tells you what it wants to do. It wants to have an independent Scotland and has worked assiduously over the last few years towards that aim. Now, whether you agree in an independent Scotland or not, the Scottish government, as is, has actually done a pretty good job over the years that it's been in power. And we'll see what happens next year, next September, when there's a referendum on independence. The polls look very negative towards independence, I have to say. We'll see what happens in the intervening months up to September of next year. But at the minute, it looks entirely likely that we will vote against independence. So, that's the current position. In terms of the comparison between English education and Scottish education, we have within the coalition government, which makes policy for England but not for Scotland, we have the kind of neoliberal agenda that Miko spoke of earlier on. We have a government that looks to America, to E.D. Hirsch, his ideas of cultural literacy. We have very, very much a free market economy within education. That is what it has been, the government has been working towards in England. The Secretary of State for Education is a chap called Michael Gove, who is actually Scottish. Every time I go to England, I apologise for him. But that is his view of this market economy, and he has concentrated very much in what England has been doing on the importance of subject knowledge. That seems to be the thing that is of prime importance to the government in England in terms of education, subject knowledge. If you're a secondary teacher, you know your chemistry, that will make you a good teacher. That is not the view in Scotland. Scotland has taken a much more rounded view of what education is about. A view that I would argue is much closer to what Mika was talking about in Finland. And we too have looked at the kind of educational gurus, people like Andy Hargreaves and Pasi Sahlberg from Finland, in fact. We have a much more collective approach to education in Scotland. Now, we are a much smaller country. The population of Scotland is just over 5 million. And we have an agreed national approach. In the run-up to the last election for the Scottish Parliament, I heard all of the main parties, their education spokespeople speaking. And I have to say it was actually very boring because they were all saying the same thing. It was very difficult to see anything radical, anything different. They were all speaking the same kind of message. And what we are looking beyond, how we are looking beyond, rather, subject knowledge is that really, really important thing for teachers about subject pedagogic knowledge. How do you take your academic information, your academic knowledge, and put it into terms that children in school will actually understand and they will be able to learn from? That is a fundamental issue if you're a teacher. In England, there is a Department of Education. And while the rhetoric in England is about autonomy for schools, independence for schools, doing their own things, the reality is different, I would argue. The reality is what you have is actually a very top-down system with the Department of Education really fundamentally directing what is going on in schools. And there is a soft soap approach. There's a good one for the translator. There's a soft soap approach to autonomy. That it's talked about and seems to be there, but in reality, it's autonomy within extremely tightly drawn boundaries. England has, for leadership, what is now called a National College for Teaching and Leadership. And it's had a number of different incarnations, and it's done some really, really good work in the past to develop school leaders in England. But now it seems to have become a political tool, quite honestly, which is dismantling initial teacher education in England, or as they call it, initial teacher training in England. They are moving over to what they're calling schools direct. So the place of the university in teacher education has been marginalised, perhaps even done away with altogether. And that responsibility has been given to the schools themselves to train their own teachers. You also have a system of free schools and academies. Now you can look to some other systems within Europe and see free schools in Sweden, for example. You can look to America and see the kind of academy tradition developed there. And you have, as well as that, freedom for these institutions more or less to do what they like. The free schools and the academies, for example, do not need to employ qualified teachers. They can simply employ anybody they want to employ to teach. There is no need to have a teaching qualification to teach in a free school or an academy. Now, from my point of view, from the Scottish point of view, we just find that inconceivable that you would want to have people who are not teachers teaching. You also have in England a body called Ofsted, which is the inspectorate. And Ofsted has a very, very strong role in education in England. The schools jump when they hear Ofsted is coming to visit them. There is real concern in a school when that happens, when the Ofsted inspectors are coming. In Scotland, as I said, much smaller country, we have a Scottish government. We have the organisation that I work for, the General Teaching Council for Scotland, and I'll tell you more about it in a minute or two. We are in the process of developing a college for educational leadership, and I'll say a wee bit more about it as well. We talk about initial teacher education, not training, education, because we see being a teacher as being a much more rounded role, a really important, significant role, the kind of thing that echoes the kind of thing Mika was saying. We also have a system of comprehensive education. We do not have free schools, we do not have academies. We do have independent schools, we do have private schools. But over the whole of Scotland, 4% of Scottish pupils, 4% of pupils are educated in private schools. So it is a tiny, tiny portion of what happens within Scottish education. And we too have an inspectorate. We still call them Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Education. And they too go into schools and see what was going on. But over the last few years, they have moderated their role from a purely inspection role to a much, much more supportive role than they used to have. We have in Scotland standards, and I'm going to talk about them. But this time last year, following on from a review of teacher education in Scotland, that statement there was put forward to the government, that within 5 years, so by 2017, anyone becoming a head teacher in Scotland should have a formal leadership qualification. At the minute, it's informal. You have to have met the standard for headship, but you don't actually need to hold a qualification. So we're moving towards more formal qualifications for school leaders. Now you can't read that, and don't worry about reading that. But the point of what I'm saying here in this quote from an article from the Sunday Times from earlier on this year was one of the academies, a primary school associated with an academy in London. They're appointed as its head teacher a 27-year-old with no teaching qualifications. They appointed her as the head teacher. She had been active within a right-wing think tank that had been very influential in the government. And despite the fact she wasn't a teacher, she was appointed as the head teacher of this school. And she was appointed, she said, because she was going to improve education, because of her curricular expertise. She was going to take on the forces within the school and change the school dramatically. So that was in April. There is the headline from the Independent from last month, when after 4 weeks in the school she resigned. So perhaps having somebody who is a teacher as the head teacher, somebody who knows something about education, might actually not be such a bad thing after all. Now, whether she's got the humility and stood down because she found the job impossible, or whether she just couldn't cope, I have no idea, but she certainly stood down. And that is the difference, I think, encapsulated there between our approach to leadership in Scotland and the approach being taken in England, where education, actual knowledge of education, seems to matter less and less. Now, my organisation, the organisation for which I work, the General Teaching Council for Scotland, has been on the go since the mid-1960s. Mid-1960s, so we have a strong place within the world of Scottish education. And we have, from last year, changed our status and been given independent status. I am not a civil servant. I do not work for the Scottish Government. We have very close links with the Scottish Government, but I do not work for the Scottish Government. And you can see there that we have various aims about improving the quality of education in Scotland, wanting Scottish education to be the best education system it possibly can be. The last of the three aims there uses the word advocate. It suggests that the GTC can act as an advocate on behalf of the teaching profession. And that sometimes gives rise to confusion in that people see that as suggesting that the GTC is a union. And it is not. We are not a teacher union. The teacher unions in Scotland are there. They are very powerful. They do a good job. They argue their case. They fight for the salaries and conditions of service of the teachers. But the GTC does not take any part in those kind of discussions. What we can advocate for is things to benefit Scottish education, to improve Scottish education. And we can speak up on behalf of all teachers in Scotland, not just the kind of factions that are within the union environment. Now, that's what we do as an organisation. We keep a register of teachers in Scotland. And to teach in a Scottish state school, you must be registered with the General Teaching Council for Scotland. We set the standards for teachers in Scotland. We set the standards, not the government, we set the standards. And we also, and we make no apologies for this, we also deal with the misbehaviour on occasion of teachers. And we remove teachers from the register if they have broken the law or they have done something that is misconduct that is not fitting of someone who is a teacher. Now, we have something like 75,000 teachers in the register, and we take maybe 15 teachers off every year. So it's not a huge issue. The vast majority of teachers in Scotland are good people who do a good job, who behave themselves very, very well. But we do remove them from the register if they don't, and they will not teach in the state sector in Scotland if they are not registered. Simple as that. The last point in that slide makes reference to something called professional update. And this is part, I think, of an important move within Scottish education that does actually fit in very, very carefully, very precisely with the title of your conference. Because it is actually about the autonomy of the teacher, but it is within the kind of framework that Mika was talking about of responsibility. Professional update will be a 5-yearly reaccreditation of the teacher's credentials to teach. Every 5 years, the individual teacher, will come to the GTC and say, here is what I've been doing, I've kept myself up to date with the standards, but that will then be confirmed by a signature from the line manager within the school who has been working with that teacher to confirm that they have been maintaining the standards they should be maintaining. Other professions do it. Other teachers in other parts of the world do it. Teachers in America relicense themselves, for example. Teachers in Victoria relicense themselves. They maybe don't use that term, but that's the reality of what is going on. And again, you won't be able to read that terribly easily, but I've highlighted two of the bullet points there. This is the kind of model of the teacher that we have been putting forward in Scotland. And the 2 points I've highlighted are the two that I think fit in with the conference. It is that point about being autonomous. The teacher taking responsibility for himself or herself. Having that first line of responsibility for what you're actually doing. But please note the way that we have phrased it there. It is being autonomous within a system. It is not just, as Mika said, about having total independence to do whatever you like. It's that recognition that there are boundaries to what you're actually going to be able to do as an autonomous teacher, working within the system that is there. And the second bullet point that I've highlighted is that notion of accountability. Accountability. And while we do have an inspectorate, absolutely we have an inspectorate, the first step of accountability should be the individual taking responsibility for their own actions, their own quality, their own teaching. So we are looking for accountability as people think about it and how they are putting forward their own teaching, how they are interacting with pupils, what the impact is on the pupils that they have got. So I think there are a lot of similarities between what we're trying to do in Scotland and what Mika has been talking about in Finland. So autonomy and accountability. I mentioned the standards, and we have a complete suite of standards. From when you're a student in initial teacher education, the provisional registration part there, going through a probation period, which is our full registration standard, and then throughout the rest of your career, if you're continuing to work in a classroom, that we have this thing called a standard for career-long professional learning. And it's an attempt to have teachers motivated throughout their career to take that kind of leadership, to take that kind of autonomy and continue to take the responsibility to move them forward. Teachers do not have a nice straightforward career path. You know, we all know in this room that teaching is a tough job. Teaching is difficult. Teaching is not a terribly easy thing to do. And teachers have children, they have elderly parents. Sometimes they plateau in the level of their performance. Sometimes they actually decline in the level of their performance. What we hope is that the standard for career-long professional learning will keep them aspiring. It will be an aspirational standard to encourage them to do the best they possibly can, remaining in the classroom. We then have standards for leadership and management. And you can see from the bracketed comment there that we've thought about both middle leadership and headship. We have 2 levels of promoted post in Scotland below head teacher. We have principal teachers and depute heads. And the middle leadership part speaks to them about their responsibilities for leadership within the system, within schools, within what they do, their role. Now, in all of the standards, we have placed exactly the same, word for word, the same statements about values. And these are not values that the GTC has decided and handed top down like tablets of stone to the profession in Scotland. These are standards, these are values rather, which were extensively debated when we reviewed the standards just over a year ago. There was lots of discussion, lots of argument, lots of consideration of these standards. And we put right at the top this notion of social justice. Because in Scotland we do have difficulties. We have areas of real deprivation. We have areas where children live in poverty. We have areas where parents are unemployed, crime is rife, drug addicts, too much alcohol. We have lots of problems like that in particular areas in some of our cities. What does the education system do to play its part in making sure that the kids that come from these kind of areas can get the best out of the education system as they possibly can? Now, education can't solve all the problems, but what can it do to try and help these kids? So we have that. We also believe that as a teacher, you should have integrity. You should do the things that you believe in. You should do things that fit in with our view of what the profession should be doing. And we also believe that you need to have trust and respect. You need to have the trust and respect of your pupils. They're going to learn far better if they have trust and respect in you. You need to have the trust and respect of the parents. Education will be much more successful if parents actually support what is going on within the school, within the actual classroom. You need to have the trust and respect of your colleagues, and you need to have the trust and respect of the school management, and ultimately you need to have the trust and respect of the government and the whole population. So trust and respect is important. And you need to be committed. You need to be able to sustain this career, sustain your effort over a long-term career. That's really, really important. The reference at the bottom of that slide to COPAC, the Code of Professionalism and Conduct, is something else that you will find along with the standards on the GTC website if you're interested. The Code of Professionalism and Conduct is about the behaviour of teachers in Scotland. It is about professional ethics. And again, it is not just a list of things saying to teachers, thou shalt not do this. It presents to teachers a series of ethical dilemmas. It says to them, you need to think about this if you're a teacher. Something like Facebook. Hundreds, thousands of people are on Facebook. Lots of teachers will use Facebook. If you're a teacher, however, take care what you put onto Facebook. If you're young and you go out on Saturday night and you have too much to drink at a party, it might not be too wise to put your photographs onto Facebook where your pupils can see them. So think sensibly as a teacher about your own behaviour. Think about the kind of responsibilities you've actually got. And that's something that is important to Scottish teachers. You see there a diagram, an illustration that comes from all the standards. And you see there what I've been talking about, the values, absolutely the heart of that. But you also see the two other areas that we think are important for being a teacher. You need to have professional knowledge and understanding to teach. We see that as being fundamental. And you need to have the skills and abilities to stand in a class, to interact with a class, to facilitate the learning of pupils. It has to be a combination of all these things that go together to make you a good teacher. Now, I've been saying some of the background things about our standards, but we have put information into each of the standards about leadership. That was one of the things that we really wanted to do when we last reviewed the standards. We wanted to say that no matter what your role is as a teacher or as a student even, you have opportunities, you have potential times when you can show leadership. And we did that last time round. We wrote that in quite deliberately. Absolutely. So at the first, most basic level, you have that kind of responsibility for the leadership of learning within classes. That's important. What goes on in your class really matters. As you move into career-long professional learning, you should be doing what it says there in the second extract. Not only should you be thinking about your own class, but you should be thinking about how you support your colleagues. How can you work with your colleagues? How can you be part of that community of learners, as Mika's talked about earlier on? How can you add to that? What can you do to help and support that? And the standards for leadership and management, when you're moving into formal promoted posts, you should be doing both of these things, but you should also be thinking about how you can work collegially. How can you develop within the school an atmosphere, an ethos of collegiality? And that is important, we believe. Now, many of you in this room will have read Andy Hargreaves, and you'll also know about contrived collegiality. It's not always genuine what goes on in schools, but we need to work at making it genuine, to have that supportive environment so that teachers actually can give their best performance. What we said is this about the difference between leadership and management. And the first 2 bullet points there, as you can see, are about what leadership is, about having that kind of vision to change. Mika talked about teaching being about the future. So is leadership. Leadership is about moving beyond the present you currently are in to something that's better. Now, I know that potentially sounds a pious hope, but we need to make sure we work towards that kind of aim. And what do you do to mobilise, to support yourself and your colleagues moving towards that? That's important as well. But let's not push management to the side. Of course, management matters as well. You have to make sure there are systems within a school that actually are able to be operationalised so that leadership can have its opportunity to develop and flower. It's really important that the management of the school, the systems in the school are supportive rather than being bureaucratic and burdensome. If that's the case, there is a real difficulty for moving leadership forward. Now, I mentioned earlier on that we are moving towards the notion of compulsory qualifications for headship. At the minute, we do not have that compulsory nature. It is meeting the standard, is what I talked about. But we do have a Scottish qualification for headship that is based within the universities. And we have 3 different university consortia that deliver this programme along with the local authorities in Scotland. And we have only 32 local authorities in Scotland, so it's relatively easy to have partnership in that kind of way. It is an academic programme that is done while in service. It is not, you do not go back to university, you continue to work in your school, but you follow this programme to meet the standard for headship through the Scottish qualification for headship. You'll see at the second last bullet point there that we also have something called a flexible route to headship. The flexible route to headship is a non-academic pathway, if you like, although I think that might be a misnomer, but a non-academic pathway based on a model of coaching. So you're working within your school, you're working with somebody who's been appointed by the local authority as a coach for you, a one-to-one coach. And that person will guide you, will suggest things to you, will act as a sounding board, will help support you developing your own leadership within your particular situation. Now that's fine as long as you get somebody who's a good coach. If you get somebody who's innovative, interesting and interested, that's great. You can have the problem, of course, where your coach is very conservative with a small c, reactionary perhaps, doesn't want to move things forward, and that's not so successful. Now the GTC accredits both of these programmes, and to try and make sure that there is equality of provision across these 2 programmes, we actually help with the assessment. We look at the assessment of what is going on there. We don't do the assessment, but we help with the assessment to ensure that there is that validity and reliability in the results of these 2 different routes. Coming through these programmes, well, what kind of leader are you? Are you any of these? And you'll recognise these. And maybe being a leader is accommodating all of these in the one person. But you know about the juggling. You know about being superwoman. You know about being the person who's working with pupils and working with your colleagues. You know about the person top right there who is tearing her hair out because she's just overwhelmed because it's such a difficult job. So we're aware of these different types of leaders. And we've said this in the introduction to the standard for standards for leadership and management. And please notice just the first sentence of that, where it says about effective leadership needing to depend on the principles of collegiality. That repeats something I said a couple of minutes ago, but we genuinely believe that kind of collegial culture within a school is really, really important to move things forward in education. As a leader, you need to have these things as well. You do need to have that strategic vision. Where am I going? Where is the school going? Where is the education system going? That's really important. Professional knowledge and understanding, I've mentioned already. Interpersonal skills and abilities. If you're the school leader and you just simply go and shut the door in your office and sit in there by yourself all day, you're not doing much leading. You have to be having that interaction with colleagues. You have to be the conduit for information policies that have been developed beyond the school into the school. You have to be that buffer. You have to be that safety valve, if you like, between the colleagues in the school and your colleagues outside the school. And that's why being a school leader, that's one of the reasons why being a school leader is so tough. We've said this as the kind of professional actions, and again, please don't bother reading that just now, but we've identified what we think are the kind of things that middle leaders in schools should be doing. And what this, we hope, will help them is through guiding them in their actions, but also helping them to reflect on their own performance. When they're thinking about their professional update every 5 years, they should be thinking about what they have been doing to move forward in these kind of areas. And we have got a similar list for the headship, the professional actions of the head teacher. And what we hope is, and I think we've probably got it right, but we'll see, what we hope is that there is a distinct step between middle leadership and headship. It is not the same to be a deputy head as to be a head teacher. There is a difference between the two in terms of what is expected of you. You might move through deputy head to become a head teacher, wonderful, but it's not quite the same. And the buck does stop with you as a head teacher. That's the reality. The buck does stop with you. In terms of the kind of system leadership, we have a national framework for educational leadership. And I've given a reference at the end of the slides for you to find that if you wish to find it. But please notice what I've been saying about self, the individual being the starting point of this. The individual with autonomy, but also with responsibility, with accountability. And the individual then working within a school system, working within the school. But if you become a head teacher, then there is almost an expectation, a duty perhaps, to make an impact, to make a contribution beyond the school, into the local authority, into the educational system that is there, and perhaps even nationally. Now, in a country of 5 million, it is quite possible for head teachers to take on that role. There are not that many head teachers in Scotland. They can, in fact, take on that role nationally. Mika's mentioned the European Policy Network for School Leadership, and some of the people sitting in the audience know about that as well. They've been at various events. It has been an interesting group. There have been lots of debates, lots of discussion, some arguments, I have to say, but it is fascinating to look at how the different countries within Europe are considering the same kind of issues, because we all do have the same kind of issues. What do we do to improve our school leadership our educational leadership, our education systems. And I think the point was well made earlier this morning. You cannot just adopt another country's system to your own country's needs. It doesn't work that way. You can adapt, you can learn lessons, absolutely. You can look at things and say, well, that may fit there, but it certainly wouldn't fit here. So that has been, I think, one of the real strengths of the European Policy Network. I think it's been a boon to be part of it, to look at what other countries have been doing. That is a reference for the leadership framework. That is a reference for the GTC Scotland standards. You'll find them all there if you're interested in them on the website. There's the website generally. There is an email address. And, not badly, time up.
Okay.
I'm very happy to take some questions.
Quisiera luego de lo que has dicho, tenemos un problema en los profesores que creo que se compartido en los lugares, y es que nos resulta muy difícil encontrar directores para nuestras escuelas. Y esto probablemente tenemos que conocer el 50% de los centros educativos en los que hemos seleccionado directores y directoras. Son profesor, selección, profesor, directores, se han presentado voluntariamente para las de los 184 directores que se presentaron a la última vez, eran 184 directores para 183 escuelas. Es decir, que en 183 escuelas solo tuvimos un director, un candidato, en unas tuvimos dos candidatos y en otras no tuvimos ninguno. Este sistema, bueno, sistema de formación de líderes tiene clientes. ¿Cómo es posible?
These are very good questions. That is a very good question. We have in Scotland not a leadership crisis of the kind of in the kind of terms that have just been described there. But we do have issues in not having enough people applying for head teachers' jobs. There is an organisation in Scotland called the Association of Directors of Education Scotland. The directors of education are the people in the local authorities, the municipalities that are in charge of education. So they are an important group. And just a couple of weeks ago, they wrote a paper, it's not public yet, but they wrote a paper which was about exactly that issue. How do you ensure that you have a sufficient quantity, never mind quality, sufficient quantity of people coming forward for head teachers' posts? And it is a big challenge, big challenge. And like I said, Scotland is not a large country. We have lots of small schools because we're quite a rural place. How do we get teachers to fit into that? And it is not just about salary. It is not just about what you are paid. Teachers, head teachers have to be reasonably well paid to attract them in, absolutely, but that is not sufficient. What you have to have is a recognition of the support that they need to do that job. But it's a very, I have not been a head teacher, but it is a very, potentially a very lonely job. So that they should not see themselves as being alone. That they should have access to networks of other head teachers, to further professionals who can help them within that. And they should have, we believe in Scotland, been prepared for that ultimate step to head teacher through what they've done previously, which is why we have endeavoured to put leadership into all the strategies, so that we will grow our leaders from being a student into being a new teacher, into an experienced teacher, and then through the promoted post structure. One of the things that we are doing within the rural schools, the very small schools, particularly primary schools, and some of them, we now have a head teacher who's in charge of maybe 2 or 3 different schools with a small geographical area. That brings enormous challenges. That is not a panacea by any means, but it's something that we are actually trying to do. And it is really important to support these people through. The notion of having a qualification for headship, we hope, is not seen as being something that's punitive and will put people off becoming head teachers. We actually hope it's round the other way and will be supportive and encourage them to come forward and know that they're going to be able to do the job when they get there. But it's an issue in many countries.
Muchas gracias. ¿Alguna otra